At my graduation, my family handed me a small envelope and laughed, calling me broke girl. Inside was a one-way plane ticket. I thought it was a cruel joke until I landed and a chauffeur told me the truth. So I took everything. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was still trying to get the confetti out of my hair when the envelope landed in my lap. It was a small thing, plain white, no ribbon, no sparkle. It looked like the kind of envelope you'd use to hold a grocery list, not a graduation gift. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked it up, and I told myself it was just the cold from the air conditioning in the restaurant. Not nerves. Not the hollow, gnawing feeling that had lived in my chest for the past 7 years. My father, Richard, sat across from me at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on his plate of salmon. He wouldn't look at me. He hadn't really looked at me in years, not since he married Victoria anyway. To his right, Victoria Hargrove Mitchell, my stepmother of 6 years, wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile she reserved for moments when she knew she was about to deliver a wound. And beside her, my stepsister Brianna leaned back in her chair with her phone already raised, camera rolling, no doubt hoping to capture something worth posting. "Go ahead, Alina," Victoria said, her voice smooth as silk draped over broken glass. "Open it." The rest of the restaurant hummed around us, other families celebrating, clinking glasses, laughing freely. My own small party of 4 felt like a different planet entirely. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single slip of paper. A printed airline ticket. One way, departing in 3 days. Destination: a small coastal town called Harbor's Reach, a place I had never heard of. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. It didn't take long. "Hope you like it, broke girl," Brianna said, and the laugh that followed was sharp and performative, the kind she'd perfected for her social media followers. Victoria joined in with a quieter, more refined chuckle, covering her mouth with her fingers the way she did when she wanted to appear delicate. Broke girl. That was their name for me. It had started quietly, a comment here, a whisper there, but over the years it had become my identity in their household. I was the girl who worked 2 jobs to pay for college. The girl who wore last season's clothes, never mind that I'd bought them at a thrift shop. The girl who couldn't afford the spring break trips, the designer bags, or the new car Brianna had received for her 16th birthday. In their world, money was the measure of a person, and by that measure, I was nothing. My father finally looked up. "It's a ticket, Alina," he said, as if that explained everything. His voice was flat, almost apologetic, but not enough to actually stop what was happening. It was never enough. "I can see that," I said quietly. "A one-way ticket. To where exactly?" "Somewhere you can start fresh," Victoria said, tilting her head with that practiced sympathy she wore like a mask. "You've worked so hard, dear. We thought you could use a little adventure before you figure out what comes next. Consider it our gift." There was something in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction. Relief. It was as if she was already imagining me gone, a problem neatly packed up and shipped away. Brianna snorted. "Yeah, an adventure. Pack light, okay? It's one way for a reason." The laughter that followed was the worst part. Not because it was loud, but because it was so casual, so effortless, as if crushing someone's spirit was just another course in the meal. I sat there with that ticket in my hand, the weight of it both nothing and everything, and I felt something inside me shift. Not break, I had broken too many times already to break again. This was something different, something harder. The betrayal was worse than the poverty they mocked me for. They weren't just dismissing my struggles, they were celebrating them. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the narrow bed of my rented room, the one I shared with 2 other girls in a cramped apartment near campus, and stared at the ceiling, turning the ticket over and over in my mind. The fluorescent streetlight outside cast pale stripes through the blinds, and every shadow seemed to pulse with the echo of their laughter. Broke girl, broke girl, broke girl. The words played on a loop, a cruel metronome keeping time with my racing heart. I pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars, trying to push the memory away, but it clung to me like smoke. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it, hoping, irrationally, that it might be my father. A text saying he was sorry. A call to tell me the ticket was a mistake, that he'd make it right. It was Brianna. A photo had been posted to her social media. I could see it even without clicking. The preview showed the back of my head, the envelope in my hands, and the edge of the ticket visible just above the flap. Her caption read, "Sending our little broke girl off into the world. Airplane, maybe she'll find $1 out there." The comments were already rolling in. Some were sympathetic, most were laughing along. I set the phone face down on the mattress and breathed slowly, counting each breath the way my therapist had taught me years ago, back when I could still afford therapy. In through the nose, out through the mouth. In, out. The next morning, I called my father. He answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear Victoria's voice in the background, muffled but unmistakable, a low murmur of instruction. "Elena," he said, "how are you feeling about the gift?" "Gift," I repeated. "Dad, it's a one-way ticket to a place I've never heard of. No return flight, no hotel reservation, no plan. How exactly is that a gift?" There was a pause. I could almost hear him choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on thin ice. "Victoria thought it would be good for you. You know she has your best interests at heart." A sharp, bitter sound escaped me, something between a laugh and a gasp. Does she really?" "Elena. She called me broke girl, Dad, at my graduation, in front of everyone. And you sat there." The silence that followed was louder than anything he could have said. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, I'll talk to them." "You always say that," I replied, "and nothing ever changes." I hung up before he could respond, and I sat there on the edge of my bed with my hands clasped tightly in my lap, staring at the ticket on the nightstand. And then, quietly, a thought surfaced. It wasn't new. I'd been carrying it for years, tucked away in the back of my mind like a stone in my pocket, but now it rose to the surface with startling clarity. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I didn't know what it meant yet. Not fully. But I felt it in my bones, the undeniable sense that something was coming. Something they hadn't accounted for. Something that had been set in motion long before Victoria ever slipped that envelope across the table. I picked up the ticket, ran my thumb along the destination printed in small, crisp letters, and made a decision. I would go. To understand why that ticket felt like both an insult and a doorway, you have to understand what came before. My mother left when I was 9. No note, no warning, just an empty closet and a father who sat at the kitchen table for 3 days without speaking. I learned to make my own lunches, to sign my own permission slips, to become invisible when the silence got too heavy. By the time I was 12, I was practically raising myself. Then, when I was 16, my father met Victoria Hargrove at a corporate retreat. She was polished, confident, and spoke about lifestyle consulting with an air of mystery that made her sound far more important than she probably was. I never quite understood what a lifestyle consultant actually did. There were vague mentions of curating experiences and optimizing personal brands. But she dressed well, drove a leased luxury car, and carried herself like someone who believed the world owed her a stage. Within 6 months, she and my father were married. Within a year, Brianna had moved in, and my childhood home, modest as it was, became a place I no longer recognized. My mother's old garden was replaced with decorative gravel. My bedroom was repainted without my input, my things boxed and moved to the smallest room in the house. Victoria said it was better utilization of space. Brianna said it was because I didn't deserve the good room. I gave up that room entirely when I left for college, taking nothing but 2 suitcases and a small wooden box my grandmother Margaret had given me before she passed. Grandma Margaret. Just thinking about her brought a tight, warm ache to my chest. She was my father's mother, a quiet, dignified woman with silver hair, steady hands, and a mind like a steel trap. She had been a real estate investor in her younger years, though by the time I knew her, everyone in the family assumed she'd lost everything in some bad deal. She lived in a small, tidy apartment, baked the best lemon cake in the state, and never once complained about money. "Money is a tool, Elena," she told me once, her blue eyes sharp and clear. "Not a weapon. People who use it as a weapon have already lost something far more valuable." She passed away during my freshman year of college, quietly, in her sleep. At the funeral, Victoria leaned over to Brianna and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Well, at least there's no estate to fight over." And that had been that. No inheritance. No property. Just the wooden box which contained a handwritten letter, a faded photograph of my grandmother as a young woman standing in front of a large house by the sea, and a key on a thin brass chain. The letter simply said, "When the time is right, you'll know what to do." I had kept that box for 4 years, moving it from dorm to apartment, never quite understanding its significance but unable to let it go. Now, sitting on my bed with a one-way ticket to a coastal town I'd never heard of, I pulled the box from the shelf above my bed and opened it. I studied the photograph again, the house, the sea, the way my grandmother stood with her arms crossed, and a look of quiet authority on her face. I turned the key over in my fingers. And I read the letter one more time. "When the time is right, you'll know what to do." Something clicked, not a sound, a feeling, a deep, resonant certainty, like a lock finally finding its key. Victoria thought she was sending me away with nothing. Brianna thought they were proving, once and for all, that I was nothing. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I had a grandmother who never did anything without a reason, and I had a key that had never been explained. 3 days later, I boarded the plane with nothing but a backpack, the wooden box, and a quiet fire burning in my chest. The plane touched down at a small regional airport nestled between rolling green hills and the gray sweep of the Atlantic. I stepped off the tarmac into a wall of salt-tinged air, my backpack slung over one shoulder, the wooden box pressed against my ribs inside my jacket. The terminal was tiny, 2 gates, a coffee cart, and a row of plastic chairs that looked like they hadn't been replaced since the 1980s. This was not a place where people came by accident. I had no hotel, no return ticket, no plan beyond the gnawing feeling that my grandmother had left me a trail, and I was finally following it. And then I saw him. He was standing just beyond the baggage claim area, holding a small white sign with my name printed in neat, careful letters, E. Mitchell. He was an older man, mid-50s, maybe with silver-streaked hair, a pressed dark suit, and the kind of calm, steady posture that suggested he had been waiting a very long time for something to arrive. "Miss Mitchell?" he asked as I approached, his voice low and measured. "That's me," I said, my heart hammering. "Who are you?" "My name is James Harker. I was your grandmother's estate manager for nearly 30 years. He paused, and something warm flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or relief. "She asked me to be here when you arrived. She said you'd come, she was quite certain." My throat tightened. "She planned this." "May I take your bag, Miss Mitchell? There's a car outside. I'll explain everything on the way." I hesitated for only a moment. The key in the wooden box, the photograph of the house by the sea, the ticket that was meant to banish me, every fragment of the past 4 years was suddenly converging into a single point, and I wasn't about to turn away from it now. I followed him to a sleek black sedan parked at the curb, and as we pulled away from the airport, James began to speak. "Your grandmother, Margaret Mitchell, was a remarkable woman," he said. "Most people in your family believed she lost her fortune in a real estate collapse in the 90s. That was a story she crafted very deliberately. The truth is, she never lost a penny. She simply moved everything, properties, investments, a considerable trust, into a private structure that only activates under very specific conditions." "What conditions?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You, graduating from college with your architecture degree. The moment that happened, the estate was designed to transfer into your name. The ticket you received, it wasn't random. Your grandmother arranged for it to find its way to you through your father's household. She knew that eventually, someone in that house would want you gone. She turned their cruelty into the very key that would bring you here." My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs and stared out the window at the coastline unfolding before us. Rocky cliffs, weathered lighthouses, and then, rising from a point of land that jutted into the sea, a house. Not just a house, an estate. A sprawling, elegant manor with white clapboard walls, dark shutters, and a widow's walk perched above the roof. It was the house from the photograph. Exactly as my grandmother had stood before it, decades ago, with that quiet authority in her eyes. "This is yours, Miss Mitchell," James said quietly. "All of it. The house, the grounds, the trust. Your grandmother spent years making sure it would be protected, untouchable by anyone who might try to claim it for the wrong reasons." "Victoria," I whispered. James nodded. "Your grandmother was a perceptive woman. She knew about your stepmother. She knew the kind of influence she held over your father. That's why the trust was structured the way it was, ironclad, with you as the sole beneficiary. No contest, no division, it all belongs to you." He handed me a sealed envelope from the glove compartment. Inside was a letter in my grandmother's handwriting, steady, elegant, and unmistakably hers. "My dearest Alina, if you are reading this, then you have graduated, and the world has tried to make you feel small. It will not succeed. I left you everything, not because you are my granddaughter, but because you are the only one who ever understood that money is not a weapon. Use this well. Protect what matters. And never let anyone make you feel like you are less than what you are. With all my love. Grandma Margaret." I folded the letter carefully, pressed it to my chest, and made a silent promise. Then I looked at James. "I need to understand everything, every detail of this estate, every protection my grandmother put in place, and I need to speak with the lawyer who set this up." "Daniel Torres," James said. "He's been the trust attorney for 15 years. He's been expecting your call." That evening, seated in my grandmother's study, a room that still smelled like lemon cake and old books, I called Daniel Torres. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been sitting by the phone for years. "Miss Mitchell," he said warmly, "congratulations on your graduation. Your grandmother spoke of you often. She was very proud." "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to know what I'm working with, and I need to know if anyone can challenge this. The Mitchell Family Trust is, in my professional opinion, unassailable," Daniel said. "Your grandmother was extraordinarily thorough. However, I would recommend we move quickly to formally register your claim and secure all asset documentation. The sooner the trust is activated on record, the less room there is for interference." "Do it," I said. "And Mr. Torres, one more thing. I'd like you to look into my stepmother, Victoria Hargrove. Find out everything you can about her finances, her business dealings, and her history. Something tells me she's not just cruel. She's hiding something." There was a pause. Then Daniel said, with a note of quiet respect, "I'll have a preliminary report for you within 48 hours. I hung up the phone and sat back in my grandmother's chair, looking out the window at the dark Atlantic. The waves crashed against the rocks below, steady and relentless, and I felt a version of myself I hadn't known was still alive rising to the surface. Victoria had called me broke girl. Brianna had laughed. My father had looked away, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was Margaret Mitchell's granddaughter, and I was done being small. Daniel Torres' report arrived in less than 2 days, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Victoria Hargrove, whose legal name, I learned, was actually Victoria Lynn Hargrove, not the hyphenated Mitchell she so proudly used, had a trail of financial irregularities stretching back over a decade. There were outstanding debts to private creditors, a failed, lifestyle consulting business that had been quietly dissolved after an investigation into misused client deposits, and a pattern of attaching herself to men with assets. My father was her third husband. The first two had lost significant sums before divorcing her. But the most damning detail was this. 6 months ago, Victoria had quietly consulted a probate attorney, unrelated to Daniel, asking whether a stepchild could contest a grandparent's estate under state law. She had been sniffing around my grandmother's legacy before I even knew it existed. She hadn't found anything, of course. Daniel's firm had made sure of that, but the fact that she'd been looking told me everything I needed to know. I called my father that evening. He answered with a weariness that had become his default tone. Elena, are you okay? Where are you? I'm fine, Dad. I'm exactly where I need to be. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me for once. A long pause. Okay. Did Victoria know about Grandma Margaret's estate? Did she know there might be something left for me? Another pause, longer this time. I could hear his breathing, shallow and uneven. She asked questions, after your grandmother passed. She wanted to know if there was a will, a trust, anything. I told her what everyone believed, that your grandmother had lost everything. I didn't know anything different, Elena, I swear. But she didn't believe you. I don't know what she believed. She dropped it after a while. I thought she'd moved on. She didn't move on, Dad. She consulted a probate attorney 6 months ago. The silence on the other end was deafening. What? You heard me. She was trying to find a way to claim Grandma's estate. For herself, for Brianna, not for you, not for me. That can't, Elena, she wouldn't. Dad, I said, and my voice cracked for the first time since I'd landed. She called me broke girl at my graduation. She handed me a one-way ticket and laughed. She wanted me gone, not because she was being generous, but because she wanted me out of the way. And you let her. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know about the attorney. There's a lot you don't know, Dad, but I'm going to make sure you do, soon. I hung up before he could respond, and I sat in the study with Daniel's report spread across the desk in front of me. The evidence was clear. Victoria wasn't just a cruel stepmother with a sharp tongue. She was a calculated operator who had been circling my family's assets for years, and I had been the obstacle she most wanted removed. The next morning, I called Victoria directly. She answered with her usual sugary warmth. Elena, darling, how was your little trip? Did you find your adventure? Actually, I did, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. I found something quite interesting. You see, that ticket you gave me, the one you thought would send me away, it led me straight to my grandmother's estate. The silence on the other end was immediate and absolute. For a woman who never lost her composure, the pause lasted a beat too long. I'm sorry, she said, her voice suddenly tighter. What do you mean, her estate? I mean that my grandmother didn't lose her fortune, Victoria. She protected it. She placed it in a trust for me, and I'm standing in the middle of it right now, a house on the coast. Properties, investments, all of it, all mine. That's impossible, Victoria said, and now the silk was gone from her voice, replaced by something raw and jagged. There was nothing, your father confirmed. My father didn't know, that was the point, she didn't trust you. And it turns out she was right to be careful, because 6 months ago, you consulted a probate attorney about contesting a grandparent's estate. Whose estate were you asking about, Victoria? Mine. The explosion that followed was spectacular in its clumsiness. How dare you, she hissed. How dare you spy on me? You ungrateful, miserable little, those were private conversations. You have no right. I have every right, I said evenly. It's my family, it's my grandmother's legacy, and you have absolutely no claim to it. The trust is ironclad. Daniel Torres, he's the attorney, you can look him up, has confirmed it. There is no contest. There is no division. You and Brianna will never see a single cent of it. You think you're so clever, Victoria spat. You think you've won something, you're still just a broke little girl who... I'm the granddaughter of a woman who saw you coming from a mile away, I said. And I want you to know that the very ticket you gave me to get rid of me was the key that activated everything. You handed me my own inheritance and laughed while you did it. I hung up. My hands were trembling, but my voice had not wavered once. And for the first time in 7 years, the hollow ache in my chest felt less like a wound and more like a space being filled with something strong. Victoria didn't take the news quietly. Within 48 hours of our phone call, I received a formal letter, delivered by courier to the Harbor's Reach estate, from a law firm I didn't recognize. The letter demanded that I cease all actions related to the purported Mitchell family trust, pending a full review of the trust's legitimacy and the circumstances of its activation. It was signed by an attorney named Gerald Pratt, whose online profile revealed a practice focused on contested estates and, curiously, a history of representing clients in cases involving financial fraud. Victoria had hired a lawyer. She was coming for the trust. Daniel Torres reviewed the letter and called me that same afternoon. His tone was calm but pointed. "Gerald Pratt is aggressive, but he's not particularly careful," Daniel said. "This letter is full of bluster, but there's no legal standing. The trust is registered, activated, and fully compliant with state law. Victoria has no relationship, by blood or by adoption, to Margaret Mitchell. She has zero claim. However, the fact that she's hired counsel means she's not giving up. We should be prepared for her to try something unconventional." "Like what?" "Public pressure, social media, family manipulation. She'll try to make this look like you're stealing from the family, turning your father against you, painting you as greedy or dishonest. It's a common strategy when the law isn't on your side." He was right. Within days, Brianna had posted a video on her social media channels with the headline, "My stepsister is hiding a secret fortune and won't share with our family." The video was light on facts and heavy on tears, Brianna's specialty, and it painted me as a selfish, secretive girl who had abandoned her family the moment she found money. The comments were divided. Some called Brianna entitled. Others sided with her, saying family wealth should be shared. A few people recognized my name from the earlier broke girl post and connected the dots, pointing out the cruelty of mocking someone's poverty and then demanding their inheritance. I didn't respond publicly. Daniel advised against it. "Let her talk," he said. "Every post she makes is evidence of her motive. We're building a case, Elena, not just for the trust but for the full picture." And the full picture was staggering. Daniel's deeper investigation into Victoria's past uncovered 3 formal complaints filed against her lifestyle consulting business by former clients who alleged she had misappropriated funds meant for investment portfolios she had promised to manage. None of the complaints had led to charges. Victoria had settled quietly each time, but the pattern was unmistakable. She had a history of finding other people's money and trying to make it her own. Even more troubling was the discovery that Victoria had encouraged my father to take out a second mortgage on our family home 2 years ago, ostensibly to fund home improvements that had never materialized. The money, Daniel traced, had gone toward paying off Victoria's private creditors. My father's house, the home I'd grown up in, the one my mother had helped build, was now leveraged to the hilt to cover Victoria's debts. My father didn't know, or perhaps he did and couldn't bear to face it. I called him again. This time, I didn't ask questions. "Dad, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen, not as Victoria's husband, not as Brianna's stepfather, as my father." "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "Victoria took out a second mortgage on the house. The money didn't go to renovations. It went to her creditors. She's been using your assets to pay off debts from her failed business and her personal spending. I have the documentation. Daniel can walk you through it." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard something I hadn't heard in years, my father crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, ragged breathing of a man who had been pretending for so long that the weight of the pretense had finally crushed him. "I didn't want to see it," he said. I thought if I just kept the peace, it would all be fine. I thought she meant well. I thought." "I know, Dad," I said softly. "But you need to see it now. She's hired a lawyer to challenge Grandma's trust. She's using Brianna to attack me publicly. And she's been draining your home for years. You have a choice to make." "What choice?" "You can keep standing with her, or you can stand with me, but you can't do both. Not anymore." He didn't answer that night. He said he needed time, and I gave it to him because I meant what I said. The choice had to be his. I couldn't make it for him, and I wouldn't try. But time was running out. Daniel had received notice that Gerald Pratt was filing a motion to challenge the trust's activation, claiming that the conditions of my graduation were vague and unenforceable. The hearing was set for 3 weeks hence. Daniel was confident. "The trust language is airtight," he assured me. "But I want to go further. I want to present not just the trust documentation, but the full record of Victoria's financial conduct, her history, the complaints, the mortgage. I want the court to see exactly who is behind this challenge and why. Do it, I said, all of it. And then I waited. I walked the grounds of my grandmother's estate each morning, listening to the waves, feeling the salt air on my skin. I sat in her study and read the architecture books on her shelves, books she had saved, I now realized, for me. I held the brass key in my hand and understood at last what it opened, not a door, but a future. My grandmother had planned all of this, every detail, every protection, every safeguard. She had known that one day, someone would try to take what was mine. And she had made sure they couldn't. The hearing was coming, the truth was ready, and I was no longer afraid. The hearing was held in a narrow courthouse in the center of Harbor's Reach, a building with creaking wooden floors, tall arched windows, and the kind of quiet dignity that made every raised voice feel like a violation. It was not a grand stage, but it was the right one. My grandmother would have appreciated that. Daniel Torres sat beside me at the petitioner's table, his briefcase open, his documents organized with military precision. Across the aisle, Gerald Pratt sat with Victoria, who wore a charcoal dress and a strand of pearls that I recognized, because I'd seen them in my mother's jewelry box years ago, before Victoria had reorganized the family possessions. My father was not with her. He was in the back row of the gallery, alone, his hands clasped between his knees, his eyes fixed on the floor. Brianna was not present. Daniel had advised against it, and for once, Victoria had agreed, likely because she didn't want her daughter's social media theatrics undermining the gravity of the proceedings. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Honorable Catherine Barlow, sharp-eyed, patient, and known, according to Daniel, for having little tolerance for frivolous estate challenges. She reviewed the initial filings with a thoroughness that made the room feel smaller, then looked up and addressed Gerald Pratt directly. "Counselor, I've read your motion. You are challenging the activation of the Mitchell family trust on the grounds that the conditional language is vague and unenforceable. Is that correct?" Gerald Pratt stood and adjusted his tie. "Yes, Your Honor. The trust stipulates that the beneficiary must complete her education to activate the estate. Our position is that this language is ambiguous. It does not specify a degree, an institution, or a level of completion. It could mean anything from a high school diploma to a postdoctoral fellowship. Such vagueness renders the condition legally unenforceable." Judge Barlow turned to Daniel. "Mr. Torres." Daniel rose with a calm that bordered on serene. "Your Honor, the trust document specifies, and I direct the court to page 7, paragraph 3, that the condition is met when my granddaughter, Elena Margaret Mitchell, earns a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution. Miss Mitchell graduated 12 days ago with a Bachelor of Architecture from Whitfield University, a fully accredited institution. Her degree conferral is a matter of public record. I have submitted the certified transcript and the university's official confirmation of graduation as Exhibits A and B." Judge Barlow reviewed the documents for a long moment, then looked at Pratt. "The language seems quite specific to me, Counselor. Do you have precedent supporting your claim that this constitutes vagueness?" Pratt shifted. "Your Honor, we would also argue that the trust was created under questionable circumstances. Margaret Mitchell was elderly at the time of its formation, and we believe there may have been undue influence by the trustee, Mr. Torres, or others. Mr. Torres has been the trustee for 15 years and was retained by Margaret Mitchell personally," Judge Barlow said, her tone cooling noticeably. "Do you have any evidence of undue influence? Any testimony, documentation, or credible allegation?" "We are still investigating that avenue, Your Honor." Daniel stood again. "Your Honor, if I may, we anticipated this line of argument. Margaret Mitchell's cognitive competence at the time of the trust's creation is fully documented. I have submitted Exhibit C, a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Raymond Park of Coastal Neurology Associates, dated 3 weeks before the trust was executed." Dr. Park found Margaret Mitchell to be in full possession of her cognitive faculties, with no evidence of impairment, dementia, or undue influence. I also have a signed and notarized video statement from Margaret Mitchell herself, recorded the same day, in which she clearly articulates her intentions for the trust and names her granddaughter as the sole beneficiary. A murmur rippled through the small gallery. I glanced back at my father. He had lifted his head now, and his eyes were wide, not with surprise, but with recognition. He was hearing his mother's voice in his memory, perhaps, the way I had heard it every day since I'd arrived. Judge Barlow nodded. I will review the video statement, but based on what has been presented so far, I see no grounds to challenge the trust's activation. Mr. Pratt, unless you have additional evidence. Your Honor, Pratt said, standing again, we would also bring to the court's attention that the beneficiary, Miss Mitchell, has been estranged from her family and has acted in a manner inconsistent with the spirit of family unity that. Family unity is not a legal standard, Counselor, Judge Barlow said, and her voice was sharp now, the patience wearing thin. This is a court of law, not a mediation session. You are challenging a lawfully executed trust with documented competence, clear conditional language, and certified fulfillment of those conditions. I have yet to see a single piece of credible evidence supporting your challenge. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Torres, you mentioned additional materials. Daniel nodded and opened a second folder. Your Honor, while we are confident the trust speaks for itself, I believe the court should be aware of the context behind this challenge. The individual who initiated this proceeding, Victoria Hargrove Mitchell, the stepmother of the beneficiary, is not a blood relative of Margaret Mitchell and has no legal standing to contest this or any estate related to the Mitchell family. Furthermore, we have documented a pattern of financial conduct that is directly relevant to her motivation in bringing this challenge. He presented the evidence methodically, piece by piece. The 3 client complaints against Victoria's dissolved business, the second mortgage on my father's home taken out under false pretenses, the probate attorney consultation from 6 months prior. And finally, the detail that made the courtroom go completely silent. The fact that Victoria had used the proceeds from the second mortgage to pay off personal creditors, leaving my father's home encumbered with debt that had funded nothing for the family itself. Your Honor, Daniel said, it is our position that this challenge is not a good faith legal action, but an attempt by a person with no rightful claim to gain access to an estate that was specifically and deliberately shielded from her. Margaret Mitchell knew of Mrs. Hargrove Mitchell's interest in the family assets and designed this trust precisely to prevent what is happening today. Victoria stood up. She couldn't help herself. This is absurd, she said, her voice cracking the composure she'd maintained all morning. That girl manipulated her own grandmother. She turned her against the rest of us. That estate should belong to this family, all of us, not some. Mrs. Hargrove Mitchell, Judge Barlow said, and her voice cut through the room like a blade. You will sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Your counsel may speak, you may not. Victoria sat. Her face was flushed, her pearls catching the light as her chest rose and fell with barely contained fury. Gerald Pratt put a hand on her arm and leaned in to whisper something, but she shook him off. Judge Barlow reviewed the final documents, then set them down and folded her hands. Based on the evidence presented, I find that the Mitchell Family Trust is valid, its conditions have been met, and its activation is lawful and complete. The challenge filed by Mrs. Hargrove Mitchell is dismissed, with prejudice. Mr. Pratt, I am also referring the financial documentation submitted by Mr. Torres to the State Bar for review of your client's conduct in this matter. Filing a challenge with no standing and a documented pattern of financial irregularity raises questions I am not prepared to ignore. She turned to me. Miss Mitchell, the estate is yours. I am satisfied that your grandmother's wishes were clear, competent, and lawful. I wish you well. I stood, thank you, Your Honor. And then from the back row, my father stood too. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there and then he walked, slowly, heavily, like a man crossing a bridge he wasn't sure would hold, toward me. He passed Victoria's table without looking at her. He passed Daniel without stopping. And when he reached me, he did something he hadn't done since I was a little girl. He put his arms around me and held on. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and his voice broke on the word. "I'm so sorry, Alina. I should have protected you, I should have seen it. I should have been your father." "You still can be," I said, and my own tears came now, quiet, hot, and long overdue. "You still can be Dad." Behind us, Victoria sat motionless at her table, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. Gerald Pratt was already packing his briefcase, his jaw tight with the knowledge that this case, and likely his reputation, had just taken a severe blow. The gallery emptied slowly, people glancing back at the scene with expressions that ranged from satisfaction to sorrow. My father pulled back and wiped his eyes. Then he turned and looked at Victoria, not with anger, but with something far more final. Recognition. Understanding. The end of a long, painful illusion. "I'll have my things out of the house by the end of the week," he said to her, "and I'll be contacting my own attorney about the mortgage." Victoria opened her mouth, but for the first time in all the years I'd known her, no words came out. She had lost, and she knew it. The weeks that followed the hearing were a strange and beautiful unraveling, and a rebuilding, too. Victoria's challenge collapsed entirely. Gerald Pratt withdrew from the case within days, and the state bar investigation that Judge Barlow had initiated began to take shape. The financial documentation Daniel had presented, the client complaints, the misappropriated funds, the fraudulent second mortgage, became the foundation for a separate civil action. My father, finally awake to the full scope of what had happened, filed a report with the state's Consumer Protection Division regarding Victoria's handling of his assets. The investigation was ongoing, but Daniel was confident the outcome would be significant. Victoria retreated to the house, the one with the second mortgage she couldn't afford, and found herself, for the first time, without a stage. Brianna's social media following dwindled after the hearing became public knowledge. The comments that had once cheered her on turned critical, then mocking, then indifferent. The broke girl narrative had flipped, and neither of them knew how to live on the other side of it. My father moved into a small apartment near his office. It was modest, a far cry from the home he'd shared with Victoria, but when I visited him for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Peace. Not the false peace of pretending everything was fine, but the real, hard-won peace of a man who had finally stopped running from the truth. "I've been reading your grandmother's letters," he told me one evening, sitting at his small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. "She wrote to me, too, you know. Not about the trust, about other things, about your mother, about you. She told me to be brave, and I wasn't, but I'm trying now." "That's all I ever wanted, Dad," I said, "for you to try." We spent that evening talking, really talking, for the first time in nearly a decade. He told me about the early days with my mother, about the grief that had swallowed him when she left, about how Victoria had seemed like a way to start over. He admitted his weakness plainly, without excuse, and I listened with a heart that was healing faster than I'd expected. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to build something new on top of it. Back in Harbor's Reach, I began to do exactly that. James Harker stayed on as the estate manager, and together we began the work of restoring the manor, not just maintaining it, but bringing it to life. I opened my grandmother's architecture books and began to design. The estate had a wing that had been closed for years, a beautiful, sunlit space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, and I converted it into a studio. Within 2 months, I had launched my own architectural design practice, funded by the trust my grandmother had built and guided by the principles she had instilled in me. That spaces shape people, that beauty matters, and that every structure should serve the people who live within it, not the ego of the person who built it. My first client was a local family who needed an accessible renovation for their aging mother. I took the project for a reduced fee because my grandmother would have, and because I remembered what it felt like to be the person who couldn't afford help. Daniel Torres and I became unlikely friends. He visited the estate regularly, partly for trust business and partly, I suspected, because he missed my grandmother and saw her in me. On one visit, he handed me a final document, a letter from Margaret Mitchell, held in escrow until the trust was fully settled and all challenges dismissed. I opened it alone in the study with the sound of the waves below. My dearest Alina, if you are reading this, then the fight is over and you are still standing. I never doubted you would be. You were always the strongest of us, not because you never fell, but because you always got back up. I left you everything I had, but the truth is, you were my greatest legacy long before any of this. The house, the trust, the key, these are just tools. You are the real inheritance. Build something beautiful, my girl, not just for yourself, but for everyone who was ever told they were small. I am so proud of you. All my love always. Grandma Margaret. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears fall, warm, unashamed, and full of gratitude. The estate flourished. My practice grew. My father and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, brick by brick, the way any solid structure should be built. He came to visit Harbor's Reach in the autumn, and I showed him the study, the grounds, the place where his mother had stood in that photograph all those years ago. He stood at the Widow's Walk and looked out at the sea, and I saw him smile, truly smile, for the first time in as long as I could remember. As for Victoria, the consequences arrived as consequences do, not all at once, but steadily, like the tide. The civil action resulted in a judgment against her for the misappropriated mortgage funds. The state investigation into her former business practices was ongoing, and Daniel had heard through his network that additional complaints had surfaced from former clients emboldened by the hearing's publicity. Her financial world was closing in, and the polished veneer she had spent years constructing was cracking beyond repair. She never contacted me again. Not an apology, not a defense, not a word. And I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I didn't need one. Her silence was its own verdict. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the ocean in shades of gold and amber, I stood on the Widow's Walk of my grandmother's house, the house that was now mine, and held the brass key in my hand. I had worn it around my neck every day since I'd arrived, a reminder of where I'd come from and the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. I unclasped the chain and set the key on the windowsill of the walk, letting it catch the last light of the day. I didn't need it anymore. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had finally understood. The key was never for a lock. It was for a door I had to choose to walk through, and I had. I stood there, the salt air on my skin, the sound of the waves steady below, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Home,